Okay, this is commentary on the commentary that I just did. I just reviewed all my videos that I did recently, and especially the ones where I'm talking about the artifacts. And to be honest, they're a little cringy to me because I do make mistakes in the videos and mixed up with terminology. And one of the main problems is it's so difficult to just stick with what is obvious and not try to interpret anything or try not to expand on concepts that may not pertain to that particular point, although it could be a possibility. It's hard just to stick with what is obvious and provable. Okay, it's hard to also put thoughts in a sequence when you're looking at an artifact. I used to get a headache looking at artifacts because there's just so much information, so many different possibilities, and so many ways to interpret the look of the point and what the look indicates as far as how it was made. It can be mind-boggling. So I need to stick with a simple format. I also need to correct some terminology. I tend to use base and stem together interchangeably, and that's not correct. Just to clarify, the base is actually the bottom part of the point, just the bottom edge. The base on something like this would be, this rounded bottom part. It could be pointed. If it's a pointed end, it would be a pointed base. Okay, this is a contracting stem. This is an expanding stem, and the stem is basically the hafting element where you would put it into a socket or a slot or some other haft. Okay, now how about something like this? What's the stem and the base on something like this? Well, the base is the bottom edge within this concavity. That's the base. The stem is anything below, where you haft it. And I would call these ears, but you can call them barbs too. But to be correct, if the points are on the stem, they're called ears. If the points are on the blade, they're called barbs. Okay? Sometimes I make that mistake too, where I use ears and barbs interchangeably. So I would call these ears. Okay, and the stem is the hafting area and below. So these ears are part of the stem on a point like this. Okay. Also, on a lot of these preforms that I'm going to be showing, I've got a lot more. They're not all preforms. They are blanks, bifaces. Some are unifacial. Some are worked flakes. So I'm going to try to be more specific and more correct. Like on one of them, I called one of those pieces a biface when actually there was very few flakes taken off of one of the faces. It was mostly a unifacial type of blank, right? So the first stage is called a quarry blank, where you knock a spall off a chunk, or you find something that looks like a spall almost, and you start working it. If it has some work on it, it's called a blank, right? If you can transport it easily and it looks fairly worked, it's a blank. If you work both sides, at least 60%, I think that's the percentage, I could be wrong, but at least 60% on both sides, then it's a biface. If it's only worked on one side, it's a unifacial blank. And then a preform is specific to each point type. So each point type has a preform look to it, usually. You can usually tell that, if you can tell that it is going to be a certain point, you can call it a preform. Okay, I interchanged that terminology, and I shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so mostly what I showed were bifaces and Cori blanks, and not necessarily preforms. There were a couple in there that were preforms that had the stems already started. Now, if the blank has a stem worked first onto the crude blank, I would call that a preform. You can kind of tell what it's going to be made into, even though it may not be bifacial completely. You know what I'm saying? It may only be worked slightly on one face, less than 60%, and it has a base on it. Okay, it gets a little complicated, but I would call that a preform. Okay, and I have a bunch of Cori blanks and worked flakes and utilized flakes outside that I'll be filming in the days to come, hopefully this week. And I also have a lot more in my personal collection. Those that I showed in this previous video were from a borrowed collection. Okay, I have my own stash of preforms and blanks and that sort of thing. Mostly bifaces. Okay, I have my own collection of those. I'll be showing those. I'm going to try to show all my artifacts and get that out of the way, and then I'll be doing more of the question and answer type video formats. Okay. Another thing is when I'm talking about the initial reduction on a lot of these blanks and bifaces, I say it's hard hammer. Now, hard hammer is complicated because when you first start using a hard hammerstone like this, you know, this is basically what they look like straight out of the riverbed. Actually got this from a landscape supply. It's landscape rock, okay? It starts out like this, but as it gets worn down, it looks more like this. This is an actual artifact. Same material, exact same material, but this is pretty much unworked. It does have some work on it, or some battered areas, because I did start using it as a hammerstone. But basically start like this. The thickness is comparable, I guess. And they end up looking like this. Now this one has two different uses, or had two different uses. There's a flat face where they use it as a mono, probably to grind pigment or grind something very fine, because it's very polished and flat, and also as a hammerstone, because you can see the telltale hammerstone strike defect or break. Same thing happened on this one here. I was using this as a hammerstone here, and I think you can see some battering right there, but eventually this will reduce down to about that size. It probably takes a year or two to get to this shape of constant use. Now the reason why I say hammerstones are complicated is because when you first start using a hammerstone, the surface is kind of smooth, right? And it chips in a certain way. But as it becomes more battered and dimpled and rough, it naps differently. You can produce better flakes, longer flakes, and flakes that approach the look of a soft hammer style of flaking. Okay, so that's why I'm saying, one of the reasons why I'm preferring to evaluate these initial flakes as hard hammer flakes, because I know the potential of a hard hammer stone. Okay, I know that once it gets worn in a certain way and it's made of a certain grade of material, it will be very effective, and you can use a hard hammerstone through the initial reduction at the Cori site to generate a blank, and also some of the finish work all the way almost to the end of the knapping process, okay, without using soft hammer at all until the very last stages where you need to thin down certain areas, or you need a soft hammer to actually effectively knap the material you're working with. But it can all start with this. In my opinion, a hard hammerstone is the most useful tool, at least in this area, because we have high grade stones for that application, luckily, for the points that I'm going to be showing. So that's why I'm using that idea. All right. Now, I've got some more Montels in my personal collection. I will be showing those in the next video. Just to give you an idea of the width to thickness ratio, width is first and then thickness. This here is one of my personal, from my personal collection. It's a Montel, and it's extremely thin. It is broken, of course, but I did the math on this one. It's about 5 millimeters thick and 45 millimeters wide, and it's easier to do the ratio with millimeters, so that's like a 9 to 1. That's the thinnest I have in my collection as far as ratio. I have other points that are this thin too, but this Montel is one of the thinnest I have in my collection. Okay, it's a 9 to 1. Now, in my opinion, thinness starts at about 6 to 1. Most points are 4 to 1 or 5 to 1 as far as that ratio goes. And it could be 3 to 1 too. You hardly find any points that are 2 to 1 width to thickness ratio. They usually end up being, the thickest would be 3 to 1, and then 4 to 1 to 5 to 1 is about average, and it starts to get thin at 6 to 1, in my opinion. Okay, in some areas of the country they're all thick points, and some areas, other areas are all thin points. You know what I mean? So it might not pertain to your area as far as the average goes, but here the average for us in the Southwest and in the South, and kind of this area, is 6 to 1 is where it starts to get thin. Okay. I think that's it. I'm going to be doing, I'm going to show you some close-ups of the Martindales that I showed far away in some of the other videos. And I've got some Frios that I'm going to show up close. And then I've got a bunch of others. I've got Castervilles. I've got lots of Pedernales types. I just looked through my collection. I've got true arrow points. I've got a lot of those. Over 100 true arrow points that were made during the bow and arrow era. You know, they call that the Mississippian or prehistoric era. Okay, and there's other names for that era too, where the latest time period where the bow was introduced. Okay, so I think that's it. The Jack Crafty channel is giving me some problems. I've had the worst bottleneck that I can imagine in that channel. I just can't get moving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Atlatl series and transfer it to the Allergic Hobbit channel. Push it off to the Allergic Hobbit channel. I'll continue the Atlatl Dart series on the Allergic Hobbit channel using Abo tools as much as possible. I'm probably going to switch to just Abo tools for that series to finish it out. Okay, including work on the Atlatl, another Atlatl, using stone tools. So I'm going to push that series off because that's causing the bottleneck and the blockage on that channel over to the Allergic Hobbit channel. And then the next videos I'll be doing on Jack Crafty will be with my new steel toolkit, all steel tools, and a lot of stuff that we can get from the hardware store as far as materials for arrows and materials for arrowheads and feathers and all that kind of stuff from stores, department stores, and hardware stores. Okay. All right.